Well, welcome to my review of Seven Kingdoms, which was released all the way back in November of 1997. Well, I'll be using footage from the patch that came out during 1998 and was bundled with a re-release of the game in June of 1998. There aren't any real differences between the original version of the game and the patch version of the game that are of major concern. The only real difference between the two is that the patch version includes 3 new nationalities you can play as, and includes a new weapon known as the Unicorn. Well, I'd normally move on at this point to discussing the plot, or at least discussing what story arcs the game covers if I was doing an episode of licensed RPGs. This game lacks any sort of concrete narrative, and that isn't a problem in my opinion, since the game heavily focuses on its gameplay mechanics and feels rather unique from most of the other real-time strategy games that were released at the time, and even many of the ones that would follow, like StarCraft. So you're asking yourself, how does this game differ from so many other RTSs on the market? This game lacks an emphasis on gathering resources like food and gas like Age of Empires or StarCraft, and instead focuses on rather simplistic economics and taxation. In other words, this game places a heavy emphasis on trade and population management. This can be rather frustrating to even an experienced player to a degree, since you'll constantly need to move around civilians and create new cities in order to acquire more capital to fund your war efforts. On the other hand, this process can be rather addicting in small doses if you enjoy doing rather simple tasks over and over again. The game also offers a rather complex and highly useful spy system if you know what you're doing, that can allow you to turn the tides of a war and even undermine entire kingdoms to the point that it collapses. In other words, your spies can be a very strong asset on the offensive side of things, but you can also use spies within your own forts and cities to weed out enemy agents for defensive purposes. Another factor to consider is the inclusion of a diplomacy system that allows you to create alliances, enter friendly relationships, share technology, operate in terms of money or food, purchase rival kingdoms, or even demand tribute from your enemies. And to further enhance the system, the game offers you a ranking chart to determine where the various kingdoms stand in terms of relative strength, both militarily and economically. This can make for rather strategic decisions as well, such as teaming up with other kingdoms in order to take down a world superpower, or to ally with the superpower in order to keep it off your back for a time while you prepare your defenses. There's a lot of strategic depth offered by the diplomacy and ranking system, but this system feels a bit underwhelming considering how important the military side of things is in this game. While the military is highly important, it also feels a bit underwhelming as well, since the bulk of your military will be comprised of weapons, such as cannons and fire-spitting tanks. And while trained troops are superior to weapons in many ways, you'll still find that these weapons will make up the bulk or entirety of your offensive campaigns, since they are more disposable and much easier to replace. This will force the player to quickly develop a science tower in order to research weapons technology and unlock superior weapons such as cannons and spitfires in order to decimate your enemies. These weapons may even make up the bulk of your defense as well, since they lack any sort of loyalty stats. You don't have to worry about them rebelling or betraying you like your soldiers or citizens will. And while all of the features mentioned before were rather strong positives for the most part, I feel like the enemy AI is rather weak in many ways. And while it may seem a bit unfair that I'm taking on the AI for a game that has been around for over a decade and suffers from problems common to many RTSs, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job as a reviewer if I didn't bring them up. On the whole, the AI is good at short-term planning, but it's terrible at long-term planning, or even strategic planning. This is seen in episodes 1, 2, 5, and 6 of my series where I play on sea maps. But the enemy kingdoms are extremely reluctant to develop harbors. So reluctant, in fact, that I can usually dominate the seas with little to zero opposition. In fact, the only kingdoms that tend to develop harbors are those that wish to develop trade routes between the various island kingdoms. And while this lack of insight for playing sea maps is annoying in my opinion, the overall lack of long-term planning is extremely glaring in episodes 3 and 5 in my series, where the AI will overextend its military or burn through its military might in order to push for a ceasefire to the point of collapse. The AI lacks any ability to plan for the long-term goals, which means that if the player can survive the initial onslaught, they'll probably manage to win the game, since the AI lacks any ability to effectively fight back afterwards. On the whole, the game feels rather tight in terms of gameplay, and I'd be remiss if I didn't admit to leaving out a few strategic facets earlier, such as conquering independent villages, hiring mercenaries, and the potential game-changing effects of Frightens. So if you want an understanding on most of these elements, I suggest watching episode 4 of my series, since I utilize mercenaries to conquer independent villages and deal with the treasure-dropping Frightens a little bit. You can also watch me bungle using a seat of power, since I forgot that you need to put a general or the king inside of this seat of power to lead the villagers in prayer to invoke the powers of a greater being. Yes, your generals and kings are literally prayer warriors in this game. Though on a more serious note, the greater beings can offer rather useful and game-changing advantages to the AI or player if used correctly. But on a more sour note, some of the greater beings are far more useful than others, which may be one of the few reasons you'd prefer one nationality over another in this game. And I'd feel like an idiot if I forgot to mention the fact you can accidentally trap your own units if you place your villages and buildings too closely together. Luckily, this issue was solved in the sequel, but it's something to keep in mind while playing this game. So I'd probably advise keeping a little distance between your villages and buildings if you want your units to be able to move effectively in order to counter an attack. Graphically and sound-wise, the game feels a bit mixed, to be honest. On one hand, the game honestly feels dated, but I'm not a PC gamer and have little ability to judge the graphics for the time period. On the other hand, my youngest brother managed to get my parents in a bit of hot water for bringing up the graphical depictions of violence in this game. Since if you pay attention to the heated battles in this game, you'll notice the defeated soldiers turn into rather bloody messes on the ground for a short period of time. On the solid side of things, a few of the sound effects are a bit too loud in my opinion, and while the background music was rather good in my opinion, I haven't heard it in years since one of my friends broke the disc for this game, so I've been relying on the freely available version of this game to play, which doesn't include the music. On a whole, I give the graphics and sound a pass, though since the main emphasis is on the gameplay itself rather than the visuals or the sound. In conclusion, I'd say give this game a try if you're a fan of real-time strategy games, or are simply interested in playing as a historical culture such as the Persians or Mayans. And since this game is legally available for free at 7kfans.com, you have little reason not to give it a try.